Hey there, art nerds. I hope you like acrylic markers because Ohuhu recently reached out to me and asked if I would be interested in trying out their new acrylic markers. I had so much fun with the Arrtx acrylic markers, and you guys seem to enjoy it too, that I decided I would take a look at Ohuhu's acrylic markers. Now, we have used Ohuhu's alcohol markers in the past, and they ended up becoming a brand that I recommend for people who are interested in looking into getting into alcohol markers, but don't want to break the bank. And I have high hopes for Ohuhu's acrylic markers as well. Recently, I was contacted by Arrtx to see if I'd be interested in trying out their bullet tip acrylic markers. I had a lot of fun checking those out and sharing some of my projects with you guys, and some of you guys were inspired to try your own, which I think is wonderful. So when Ohuhu asked if I'd be interested in trying out their acrylic markers, I said, sure, why not? You guys seem to be interested. Now, in the past, I have talked a lot about Ohuhu's alcohol markers. I like their alcohol markers. I recommend them for people who are interested in getting into or trying out alcohol markers rather than spending a bunch of money on something more expensive only to find that they don't like the hobby. So I have high hopes that Ohuhu's acrylic markers will be a great fit for us, for me, and for you guys. So these were sent to me care of. I did not pay for them, and the deal was that I would create a long form video. What I'm planning on doing is the long form video. Of course, we're not going to call it a review because it's not really a review. They sent it to me. We're just taking a look at them, talking about them, maybe talking about the pros and cons, but I don't know that I can tell you guys a definitive verdict because I did not pay for these myself out of pocket, and that's just a me thing. I tend to get so much angrier when I pay for something and I don't like it versus when it's sent to me. So I don't feel like it's fair to call it a review for you guys. But I'm also hoping to maybe do some Halloween inspired crafts or something with you guys. So my Ohuhu package arrived recently in a bubble wrap mailer. It is fairly easy to open. I actually thought I was gonna need an X-Acto. It does not seem to be the case. Whoa, actually, there's two things in here. Okay, all right. So they sent me a mixed media pad, 8.5 by 6 inches. So I'll be taking a look at those. I received a number 9 or a number 6, depending on how you look at it. And then I received their Ohuhu 30 color Kakaako, there we go, Kakaako set of acrylic markers. So these promise to have dual tips, bright colors, water-based, low odor ink, good coverage, and works on most surfaces. And there is a warning on the back that the plastic bag can be dangerous. So inside is our case. On the back, it lists the colors, and don't worry, we are going to go to the desktop with this. I just thought it would be more fun to do a more three-dimensional sort of intro. So the colors in this 30 color set are white, azure blue, candy pink, lemon yellow, black, red, pansy tangerine, light blue, magenta, pastel lilac and spearmint, verdis, silver, metallic blue, gold, light gray, bronze, metallic cyan, metallic purple, brown, metallic pink, metallic gray, metallic mint, neon green, neon orange, neon blue, neon yellow, neon pink, and neon rose. So we have a mix of basic colors, we have a mix of metallic colors, and then we have some neons. And this was imported by Thousand Shores Ink, Cherry Street, Newark. And a lot of this, but not all of this information is on the back of the cover, which we'll look at in a bit. And this was made in Yiwu, China. And the cover of this, and we'll take a closer look at this later, has a really cute silk screened illustration on it that says acrylic marker 30 colors. You could, and maybe we will, color this using our double-sided acrylic markers. This has a carry handle, and it is a zipper case. The nylon is actually decently made and padded. I actually think the nylon of this is nicer than the lining on the Jazza bag that I have. So that's kind of interesting. Inside are our, put this aside, our markers. They have elastic loops. The presentation on this is really nice. I'm actually kind of surprised. I wasn't super sure. I know they sent me a link, but it was a while back. So inside are our markers. They are double-sided, so we have a large bullet nib. It looks like a 3mm, and then we have a fine detail nib. I really like that. The color is listed on the larger of the two caps. So it has a color number like N531, that would be neon yellow, and the color name. There's also instructions on how to use these. So this is what they look like, pretty cute. Inside the packet were some refill nibs, both the larger bullet nibs and the smaller plastic nibs. These kind of remind me of the nibs that you would get if you buy certain brands of masking fluid pins like Pabillos. We have some instructions on how to use, and they're so cute. They don't call it hot tips, they call it warm tips. We're gonna take a look at this in a minute at the desktop. And then they gave us two swatch sheets, one on black paper and one on white paper. And then the reason I was surprised is they didn't actually, it wasn't clear to me that they were going to be sending me a mixed media pad. I was gonna try this out on the Canson XL watercolor paper, the same that I used, now I need the Exacto. The same that I used when I was talking about the Arrtx markers. And I probably still will. But if they sent me a pad of paper, I'm interested. Oh, it's cute. It's a little sketchbook. I know, it said that. Well, it said mixed media pad. So this is the mixed media pad. It is a, what size are you? 8.5 by 6, 120 pound. It promises to be erasable, acid-free, spiral bound, ideal for wet and dry media, acrylic, watercolor, pen and pencil. Well, you guys know what I do here on the channel. Acrylic, watercolor, alcohol marker, and a lot of drawing. And this is acid-free, so that means it is cellulose-based, not cotton rag, which is fine. I didn't really expect a mixed media pad to be cotton rag. There are some, but not too many. And it says, create something wonderful today on Ohuhu Mixed Media paper pads. The Ohuhu paper pad is various in size and texture. More surprises are on the way. So I'm really looking forward to trying this. There is also so they included this little flyer for the Ohuhu paper pad on the inside. And I think it's just a new product that they're hoping to get people excited about. Look, I'm always down for samples and demos and basically being sold to if the product matches the description. So good on them. I look forward to trying this out. So what I want to do is I am actually going to head back over to the desktop so we can get a nice closer look at these things. Have migrated over to the desktop so that you guys could get a better view of what Ohuhu sent me. So here is the I practiced this Kakaako series of markers. And then there's even a little graphic here that describes what the markers look like. This slips off. There is our zipper. And there's our goodies inside. And I wanted to show you guys these markers before we swatch them. So I haven't activated them yet. I haven't done anything with them since we last talked about them. There's a shaker inside. They have not yet been primed, so I'm going to need to do that on either side. So I'm going to have that's 60 tips to prime, so it'll take me a little while. I want to swatch on their paper. I want to swatch in their mixed media book, And I want to swatch on my Canson XL watercolor pad. And that'll kind of give me an idea of what kind of art projects I want to do with these acrylic markers. There are 30 colors in this set. The markers are double-sided with a 3mm fiber tip and then a smaller plastic nib on the other side. Both sides do need to be primed in order to get them started. These don't need to be primed and shaken quite as much as the Arrtx markers that I talked about not too long ago. They are held in their nylon zippered case using elastic straps. It doesn't really matter which way you put them, but it is easier to put the smaller end first. There is a color plastic collar on both ends, so it's actually pretty easy to find the marker you're looking for, to put the cap to match the marker, that sort of thing. You're not necessarily going to be getting them confused or lost the way I kind of did with some of the Arrtx markers as I was working with them. Now, getting them primed does take a little bit of time because you have 30 markers that are double-ended, so basically you're priming 60 markers at a time. So you do want to set aside the time to do that. And it does take a little while for the acrylic ink to reach both ends of the markers. To my knowledge, these are not refillable. I did not see refills available on their site. There is no indicator on the marker to show you how much paint is still in the marker the way there is with the Arrtx, nor is there a viewing window for you to be able to see how much paint you still have left. I would say that since these are double-ended markers though, you are probably going to run through them a little bit faster than you might with single-ended markers. Another thing I want to point out with double-ended markers like this, it's really important that you store the markers horizontally so that the paint can reach both tips and so that it doesn't dry out in one end or clog up in one end. We were provided with replacement nibs for both ends, both the fiber point as well as the plastic point. And I did find a little bit later on, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more, the plastic nib to be rather scratchy on many of the materials that I use and prone to sputtering. That said, I didn't have any issues with it clogging, drying up, or dying on me, as I might if they had used a very fine fiber tip for the smaller end. There are regular colors, neon colors, as well as metallic colors in this set. Little bit of a problem. The order that these are in is not the order on the sheet, so I am going to need to reorganize them before I can start swatching. They provided us with two swatch cards, a white swatch card and a black swatch card. I'm going to start with the white, and I found that Inkflow is great for both ends, smooth and decently opaque on the paper. And I wanted to try out both ends of all of the colors on all of our swatch paper. So that's why you see me doing these kinds of swatches where we start with the larger end and then we move to the smaller plastic nib. On the black paper, I noticed that the nib is a little bit scratchy and this would probably catch on wood. So if you want to use these for like wood ornaments, I would recommend you seal the wood first before you introduce your acrylic marker. Ohuhu sent this little mixed media book as well. It seems to have perforated pages. There are 62 of them. It is 120 pounds and it is shrink wrap. It doesn't actually say what it's made out of. So I'm going to guess that it's a cellulose paper. See, usually cellulose paper says acid free. And if it's made of cotton rag, usually they're very happy to brag about that. So not super sure, but since they sent this, I have a feeling they're going to start releasing more papers. I did want to try it out, especially with the acrylic markers. So inside, oh, very nice, we have a little page protector sheet. So what you could do with this is you could slide this in, and that way, if you're using alcohol markers in this little sketchbook, it won't bleed through. And I do have some Ohuhu alcohol markers that I can pull out and noodle around with at a later time. But for now, I want to go ahead and swatch the acrylic markers on this. Since they provided a mixed media book, I definitely wanted to try swatching in it. So in the Ohuhu Mixed Media book, I noticed that it works fairly well on their mixed media paper. It might be a little bit scratchy, which is not uncommon for acrylic markers on paper, but I didn't notice any pilling or tearing at this point in time. And I also noticed that these markers don't separate out as fast as the Arrtx ones do. So with the Arrtx markers, you basically have to shake, pump, and prime every time you grab that single color. With these, they stay together a little bit better, so you don't have to shake them quite as much. One kind of downside I'm noticing is we get three types of color. We have basic colors, we have fluorescent colors, and we have metallic colors. And I noticed that because we have these three types of colors, we're not really getting as much variety between colors, like as much contrast as I would like to see, or as I would find useful. So I wanted to test out the paper and these markers with like a 50s geometric sort of design, kind of like Rocco's Modern Life. So kind of like a 50s revival thing. So I went ahead and I applied a base coat using this kind of warm yellow, and I went back and filled it in. I noticed that these do tear up the paper quite a bit in a large coverage area like this. So if you wanted to cover a large area, I would start with an acrylic ink first, or a larger acrylic paint, or a larger marker than these. And the paper is pretty thirsty. I applied a base coat and then I kind of touched it up, as you guys saw. I also noticed that new colors will pick up old colors if they are not fully dry. So it's very easy to kind of pollute these markers and kind of spoil the nib. So you do want to be kind of careful with that. Once there's a layer down, this mixed media book does a decent job. So if you wanted to use acrylics in this book, you might want to apply a layer of gesso first and let it dry and then start working on it. I've seen artists on TikTok using acrylic markers to color similar to how they would with alcohol markers. And I really wonder how they don't tear up the paper to shreds. Because as somebody who has used alcohol markers for years, I've used water-based markers for years, and I've used acrylic markers off and on. One of the problems with these kind of water-based markers like acrylics, because the base is water, although acrylics are weird because they're alcohol solvent, but they're water-based. The alcohol dissolves the plastics in the acrylic, if you're curious. So if you were using acrylic markers and alcohol markers, use your alcohol markers first and then use your acrylics on top of that. But anyway, these kind of water-based, water-soluble to begin with markers are very prone to tearing up your paper because they wet the paper and the paper stays wet and it's prone to fraying. Whereas with alcohol markers, the alcohol evaporates almost immediately, so it's far less likely to tear up the paper. So I'm kind of curious how these artists on TikTok are managing that, or if there might be like a little sleight of hand knowing that there's kind of a call for this anime style art and that acrylic markers are kind of popular right now. I wanted to try out both nibs of the markers. So I did all of my larger work with the 3mm nib, and then I switched over to the fine point plastic nib for the black and white accents here. And I do need to go over some areas a couple of times, like with the white, just to build up that opacity. And finally, for swatches, I want to swatch in my Canson watercolor sketchbook. And I've already used this for the Arrtx acrylic markers, so I thought this would be a really helpful basis of comparison. As with the Arrtx markers, I wanted to swatch on my favorite inexpensive cellulose watercolor paper. So I'm using Canson XL watercolor paper. This paper works really well. It's kind of a mixed media paper. It is a wood pulp based paper that has kind of a watercolor texture embossed onto it, but it's not as likely to catch on markers. It's not as likely to catch on these kind of fiber nibs or the plastic nibs as some of the other papers that I've tried, because even though there is a watercolor texture embossed on it, it's very, very smooth and even. So the fine tip does sputter a bit on textured papers, but after Arrtx's single-sided 3mm bullet nib, it's really nice to have a smaller nib so that I could go in and add finer details if I wanted to. That was one of the areas with the Arrtx markers that I found really kind of lacking. So I'm glad that the Ohuhu markers do have two different sides. It gives you a lot more options. So to test out these acrylic markers, I thought decorating a pill case, because I needed one anyway, might be a fun test. So this is a plastic pill case from Amazon. It's actually a little larger than I expected. It's got several compartments. It's also waterproof. It has a little gasket here. So even if it were to get caught in the rain, my medication wouldn't be ruined. I've already washed it with dish soap and dried it, and my hands are clean, and it has a bit of a matte finish texture, so I'm hoping I can just get started on it right away. This is a plastic pill case that I purchased off of Amazon. It came in a set of 3. I've already washed this one off using Dawn dish soap to remove any kind of factory grease from it and allowed it to dry fully. I'm going to start by sketching in some of my mushrooms using white first. You guys can see that the white is not a one coverage white opacity. You're going to have to go over it a few times, especially on a darker color background like this. This is kind of inspired by one of the mailers that I decorated created using the Arrtx markers to send to a customer. I really liked how that turned out, and I wanted to try to do that on a pill case for my own use. These acrylic marker bullet nibs will scrape prior layers off, so they are kind of a harsher, scratchy fiber, so you want to make sure that your layers are fully dry. The coverage on these is pretty lackluster, and I'm concerned about them scraping off as time progresses. Like, this is meant to go into a purse, and I would be kind of concerned about these acrylics scraping off. Personally, I'm not a huge metallics person, so I kind of wish there were more basic colors. Like, there isn't a skin tone in this, there isn't a softer muted brown, there aren't any pastels in this set, but I can understand why people would want the metallics. Metallics are fun, especially with acrylics. It's just not for me. I did try to use the neon orange on the white as a shading color because when I swatched it, it really read more like a pastel orange, but on the plastic, it's more neon than I had kind of anticipated. So I couldn't really kind of make the neons work shift as pastels. Now, I am going over it, giving an additional layer of color. These are more like 3 layers to get full opacity acrylic markers. One of the fun things about acrylic markers is you can kind of use them for gouache-esque effects without messing around with gouache. So I really like using them for these kind of not premeditated, so they're sketchy in that regard, but they're not actually sketchy, but they're very blocky, kind of simple shapes. You can't really go in and add a lot of details, or rather I was kind of struggling with that because the paint does want to kind of scrape off of the surface. Now, I could have done a primer, like a spray paint primer on it. I maybe could have sanded it to give it more grit, but the plastic already had kind of a texture to it, so I didn't think I would really need it. I also found that I needed to limit the number of layers I did on this plastic case because these markers really start to scrape off prior layers. And this is particularly true with the fine plastic nib, as we'll see in a moment. Because I thought, okay, you know, I have a finer plastic nib. I can actually go in and maybe clean things up or add a little bit of line art or like kind of tie things together a little bit more, because this just wasn't as cohesive or as clean or as neat as I would have liked. But I really found that the small plastic nib scrapes prior layers of acrylic off. These are not a good fit on plastic, which is kind of a shame because all the stuff that I had originally bought to decorate in this review were plastic things. So I only ended up doing a couple of things this time because one, I didn't want to repeat a bunch of stuff from the prior video. Acrylic markers, in some regards, in terms of like formulation and what you can do with them, are pretty much the same kinds of things. The big differences is going to come in the color selection and the kinds of nibs they offer, whether they are refillable or not, that sort of thing. It's kind of like alcohol markers where the base formula is the same. The kind of things you can use alcohol markers for is going to remain the same. It's the kind of additions, the brush tips, the fine tips. That's what kind of makes different markers stand out, and that's where there's really room for innovation. So I'm trying to do a bit of line art here, and it's really just wanting to scrape up those prior layers. Now, I could have probably given it more time to dry, but it was actually dry to the touch. Part of the problem is the acrylics are just not really adhering to the plastic, and the plastic nib is stiff enough that it's just going to scrape that layer off since it hasn't really bonded with the plastic. And to be fair, plastic is always a difficult, annoying thing to paint. I have been trying to paint on all kinds of different plastics and acrylics, and I have had trouble with it for years. So this isn't a new problem, and it's not even an Ohuhu problem. It's kind of a plastic problem. The Arrtx video, I painted on an acrylic photo frame to kind of create a diorama look. I wanted to kind of expand on that. I was hoping to find a plain pre-cut piece of acrylic. Where I went, which is Five Below, I did not, but I did find this like line art print of 2 cats cuddling. So I thought I could paint Dax and Bowie, although they would never cuddle in real life, They can kind of stand to be close to each other, but Dax definitely gets on Bowie's nerves. I thought it would be kind of fun to see if I could recreate these two animals that I know in real life using the color selection that I have. So this set came with little potted acrylics. I didn't want to use those. I wanted to see how the markers would work on this. Now the markers themselves work decently well on this. I flip it over and colored it in reverse. So the line art is one side and I'm coloring on the other side so that the black line art would shine through, kind of like you would do with cell shading. There was no instructions with this kit like at all. In fact, they pulled the original image from Shutterstock and then Shutterstock and then traced it to make a line art. So I ended up kind of winging it and I had a hard time figuring out what was supposed to be what. As I mentioned earlier, I wanted it to look like Bowie and Dax, so I did my own thing. If you wanted to do something like this though, you could very easily buy a piece of pre-cut acrylic, trace your own pet's photo, like creating a line art out of your pet's photo using the small black pigment nib or whatever color you wanted to use for your line art. Using the smaller nib, do that on one side and do all of your coloring on the reverse. And you do have to kind of, if you're a watercolorist or a alcohol marker artist like I am, you do have to kind of work in reverse from how you normally would. So you have to kind of start with these smaller areas, these smaller details first, and then color the larger areas on top of it. So I started with the whiskers, their noses, etc. And I was surprised that you can layer these markers on acrylic without them scraping up, but you do need to be careful and let those prior layers dry. If you can find blank acrylic, as I mentioned before, you can do your own thing on this, and I think that would be really fun. Now, if you make a mistake, you can actually spray rubbing alcohol on it and then wipe it off. As I mentioned way earlier, acrylics are interesting. They have a water carrier agent that the acrylic is mixed into to make it liquidy, but after it's fully dried, you can reactivate it and wipe it off using rubbing alcohol because the acrylic is reactive to rubbing alcohol. So there is a composite wood base that came with that. We're going to talk about that in a little bit though. So this is kind of where I'm having problems with the color selection, and the color selection of these markers has been a continuous problem for me. There just isn't like a light, a medium, and a dark. So Bowie is kind of this really pretty gunmetal gray, and all they had was this really light gray that would be like the highlight on Bowie's fur if I were coloring him in real life. So for me personally as an artist, I don't necessarily benefit from having the fluorescence and the metallics. I would have benefited from having like 30 colors, light colors like pastels, mid-tone colors, and then shadow colors. But that's just how I work as an artist and the kind of stuff I make. That's not like a critique of these markers, just like a kind of a quibble about the color selection. It just wasn't that useful for me. Same goes for the yellows and the oranges. I was kind of limited in the selection. Dax is actually creamsicle color, so there's like a lot of pastel orange on him with a little bit of yellow, but he ended up just being a yellow and orange cat here. And there isn't really like a lot of nuance with the pinks as well. All of the colors are pretty like basic primary in terms of impact. So the base that came with this little kit is an MDF composite wood base. This is a bit of a different story. You can use acrylic markers on this, but this is absorbent and it takes a really long time to dry. So if you try to add details or if you try to do layers on top of it, it's just going to blur out, which maybe you can use that to your own effect, but that's just information for you to keep in mind should you want to use acrylic markers on the wood base. I figured, why not? I'm trying, every time I talk about acrylic markers, I try to try out different things, different techniques, different products with them to like kind of figure out what works or try to come up with fun stuff that you guys might want to do along at home. So I figured coloring the wood base would at least give us some experience with these kind of cheaper MDF wood products that can be somewhat common at places like Five Below and Dollar Tree. And this is the only time I end up using a metallic marker. I used a regular blue for this, but I used the metallic silver to letter on it. One thing about metallics is and these are not like chrome markers, they're just metallic. They have like a little bit of mica in them, but you're not really going to notice the metallicness of it on a matte surface or
wow, sorry, can I talk? On an, oh, now I can't say it, absorbent, there we go, surface. It's just not gonna like reflect the light enough. Metallics like this really kind of work best on shiny surfaces, on glossy surfaces, so that you get more of that shine. Now I tried to draw like a little white daisy in the center, and you guys can see it just kind of blurred out because the MDF is still thirsty. So before I say goodbye, I did want to visit the Ohuhu website as well as their Amazon listing, and we kind of look at these together. You guys probably know about Ohuhu from their alcohol markers. That's how I'm familiar with them. That was my first experience with Ohuhu, and I have talked about their markers here on the channel. So if you're curious about their alcohol markers, check the description below, check the cards. I'll talk about them a little bit more. This is actually one of the markers that I highly recommend for people who are just getting started with alcohol markers and they don't want to spend a lot of money, but they want a brush tip and they want a lot of colors. Ohuhu is great for that. The acrylic markers are kind of a newer offering for them. They don't have as wide a range. In fact, I think they only have this 30 color set. On their website, it is $34.99, but as you guys can see, there are some warnings, or maybe my browser isn't, maybe OBS isn't pulling up the warnings. Anyway, I got some red flag warnings about their website. I received mine from them. They were sent care of. I have purchased from Ohuhu in the past. Actually, Cheap Joe's in the North Carolina area used to carry Ohuhu, so I've bought some through them, and I've also bought some through Amazon. So my recommendation would be, if you're buying Ohuhu, just go ahead and get it through Amazon. You're going to pay less, and you're going to pay less in shipping. And that's actually something, as you guys will see in a second, the Amazon listing is almost $10 cheaper at $26.99 rather than $35. So you will get a better deal if you get them on Amazon. Amazon is going to be the one to deliver them, and then if you have Prime, that could be free delivery. So if you want to get these markers, my recommendation would be to go ahead and get them through Amazon. And in my correspondence from Ohuhu, I know they're going to provide me with some links, and they may provide me with an affiliate code or like a savings code. I never cash in on the affiliate code stuff from these companies, so like I don't really care if you order them from Amazon or if you order them from Ohuhu or you buy them at walmart.com or what. That doesn't really matter. I just want to make sure that you are happy with the product and you're happy with the shipping, and that I didn't like lead you astray. So if you have a source that you want to get these through, go for it. That works. I just found that Amazon has a better price. Now, one of my kind of quibbles is that a lot of the art that they show often has colors that just weren't available in this set. Like that light pastel blue, that wasn't in my set. That off-white was not in my set. So maybe the artists who are doing art for them are bringing in additional colors and not disclosing it. I don't know. They also have like anime art, right, where they show like skin tones that were done in acrylic. There are no skin tones in this set. You could not draw that image that she has shown, or that they have shown, with the colors that are in this set. And that's a little bit of a quibble for me as somebody who likes to draw people and as somebody who likes muted tones and pastel tones, that those colors were not in this set. I did kind of find that disappointing. So that is an area that if Ohuhu wants to expand and offer more colors, that would be very appreciated. My verdict on Ohuhu's acrylic markers. This is going to be mostly personal opinion. Keep in mind, this wasn't a full review because these were sent to me care of in exchange for a video, but I did try to cover a lot of bases. So this is a 30 color set. I believe it's 36, yeah, 30 color set. It goes for around $33 on the Ohuhu site and around $23 on Amazon. And of course, with the way Amazon fluctuates, that could be totally different even by the time I'm editing this. So I will try to include a scroll, but just keep in mind that it's in about that price point. I would recommend that you go with the Amazon site because the Ohuhu site had some flags pop up, and I would just be careful and allow Amazon to deliver them. I didn't have any problems with it, and I do think that this set actually came via Amazon, so that is the way that I would go if I were you. Now, for me, I'm not really looking for, I'm looking for like all of one type of color, right? So if this had been a 30 color set,
that it had skin tones in it, that it had some darker, more saturated colors in it. That would have been more what I was looking for. I'm looking for a light, a medium, and a dark. That's what's most useful for me when shading, whether it's alcohol markers or acrylic markers. And I felt like this set just couldn't hit that for me. I'm not a big let's use metallics kind of person, so I didn't get a lot of use out of the metallics, but you might love the metallics. They might be exactly what you're looking for, and they might be perfect for personalizing tote bags or shoes or lunch bags or anything like that. I wanted to try testing these out on a few different media. So I have the Mixed Media sketchbook that they sent, and I enjoyed it. I think that these are a good fit on the sketchbook that they included. I liked having a 3mm bullet nib, and I really liked having that fine point plastic nib. That said, the fine point plastic nib sketches, catches, and skitters on plastics. So I also decorated a pill case because I have to take a lot of pills and I always seem to be in the car. So this was an object that I thought would be different enough, interesting enough. You can buy them really cheap and then customize it. You could use it as a little watercolor palette or like even a small toiletries palette if you want to. So I found that it would scrape up prior layers. I didn't really have the colors I wanted for the kind of art I like to make. Again, a personal preference. And the plastic nibs kind of tore up and removed prior layers of color. I also tried doing one of these acrylic art things from Five Below. And I found that the gray just wasn't dark enough to make it look like Bowie. And I really didn't have as wide a color selection when you take out those metallics as I might like. I did use some of the fluorescents for this, but I found when coloring the pill case that the fluorescents were just not as helpful for me and the kind of art that I do. But that is 100% a personal bias, a personal opinion, a personal vibe. I like more muted colors and kind of like softer, more gentle colors, but you might love the inclusion of fluorescents and metallics in the set, and it might be a really good fit for you. I also tried coloring the base that came with the set. It's made of an inexpensive wood MDF, and this is very thirsty, and I found that it took a really long time to dry. So my recommendation, if you're going to use acrylic markers on wood, is use something with a sealed surface or seal it yourself before adding your acrylic marker, because I found just using acrylics on wood in the past that as the wood absorbs the water in the acrylics, it can expand and it can cause cracking and your piece won't last as long. So just sealing it with some gesso or priming it or preparing it in some way can really help with the longevity of the piece, even for just something fun and cute like this. So thank you guys so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Hopefully I was able to demonstrate and answer your questions about Ohuhu's new acrylic markers. Thank you again to Ohuhu for sending these to me. I had a lot of fun playing with them. Acrylic markers, as I've said in the past, is not necessarily something that I would have sought out for myself. I've picked up a few here and there piecemeal, but I never really got into them. So I really appreciate these companies wanting to work with me to give me a chance to actually play with them and share what I found with you guys. So thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope to see you guys again soon with another art supply review, tutorial, artist chat, or something kind of in between like what we have here. Have a wonderful day, guys. Bye.